I raised my children to be better than thieves, but when I discovered they'd stolen from their own child, I realized I'd failed as a mother. What I didn't fail at was being a grandmother who fights back. My name is Dorothy, and at 73, I thought I knew my children. After my husband Earl passed 5 years ago, I'd spent countless hours organizing our finances, making sure everything was in order. We'd been blessed. Earl's construction business had done well, and we'd saved. Diligently. 43 years of marriage, 43 years of putting away a little each month, living below our means so our family would have security. Earl was old school, the kind of man who believed in hard work and keeping your word. Dorothy, he'd say, adjusting his reading glasses as we went over the books each Sunday night, "Money isn't about what you can buy today. It's about the choices you give the people you love tomorrow." He'd trace his finger down our budget sheets, showing me how every dollar had a purpose, every sacrifice had a reason. The plan was simple. Leave enough for our 2 children, Michael and Sarah, but set aside a substantial college fund for our grandson, Tommy. That boy was the light of our lives from the moment he drew breath. Tommy was 8 when Earl died, all gap-toothed grins and endless questions about Grandpa's tools. He'd spend hours in Earl's workshop, pretending to hammer nails while Earl showed him how to measure twice and cut once. "This boy's got potential. Dorothy," Earl would whisper to me as we watched Tommy carefully stack blocks with the same precision Earl used on construction sites. "Smart as a whip, curious about everything. We need to make sure he gets his chance." His parents, Michael and his wife Lisa, had been struggling even before Earl's death. Michael worked at an auto parts store, the kind of job where you're always on your feet, always dealing with frustrated customers whose cars won't start. Lisa cleaned houses when she could find work, her knees aching from scrubbing other people's floors, her hands cracked from harsh chemicals. I watched them scrimp and save, never asking for handouts despite their pride wearing thin around the edges. They lived in a small rental house on the other side of town, the kind of place where the windows stick and the hot water runs out too, fast. But it was clean, and they were trying, and that's what mattered to Earl and me. "They're good parents," Earl would say when I worried about their finances. "They just need time to find their footing." That's why Earl and I had been so careful about Tommy's fund. $75,000 earmarked specifically for his future. Enough to cover 4 years at the state university, with some left over for books and living expenses. We'd started saving for it the day Tommy was born, adding to it every month like clockwork. I'd named Michael as the trustee, thinking a father would protect his son's interests above all else. Earl always said trust was the foundation of family, and I believe that with every fiber of my being. "Michael's a good man," Earl assured me when we set up the account. "He'll do right by his boy. Looking back, maybe I was naive. Maybe I should have seen the signs when Michael started asking detailed questions about the account. Questions that went beyond natural parental curiosity. Questions like, how exactly does the withdrawal process work? And what kind of documentation is required? Maybe I should have paid more attention when he suggested better investment opportunities, or mentioned how hard it was to watch money just sitting there earning minimal interest while they struggled to pay bills. But when you love someone, when you've raised them to be honest and decent, you don't expect them to rob their own child blind. You don't imagine that the little boy who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on ants would grow up to steal his son's dreams without losing a moment's sleep. The discovery came by accident, the way most devastating truths do. It was a Thursday, afternoon in March, one of those early spring days when you can almost smell hope in the air. I was helping Lisa with some paperwork for Tommy's school. He needed documentation for advanced placement testing, something that filled my heart with pride. This boy was going places, just like Earl had always predicted. I was sitting at their kitchen table, The same wobbly one they'd had since Tommy was a toddler, when Lisa stepped outside to take a phone call from her sister. That's when I noticed. Their bank statements scattered on the surface, held down by a coffee mug with a chip in the handle. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally. But there, in black and white, were deposits that made my blood run cold. Regular transfers. Amounts that looked suspiciously familiar. $800 on January 15th. $200 on February 3rd. $2,500 on February 28th. My mind started racing, doing calculations that I desperately hoped were wrong. "Lisa, honey," I said when she came back inside, trying to keep my voice steady. "These deposits, where are they coming from?" She looked confused, then panicked, like a deer caught in headlights. "Oh, those... Michael handles all the finances. I think maybe it's overtime pay? Or that side job he mentioned?" But I knew Michael's schedule. I knew he hadn't worked overtime in months, and I knew exactly what those numbers meant, even though my heart was screaming at my brain to find another explanation. Any other explanation. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my bedroom until 3 a.m., wearing a path in the carpet Earl had installed with his own hands 20 years ago. Finally, I called my lawyer, Harold Peterson, a man who'd handled our family's affairs for 30 years. Harold had gray hair now, and reading glasses that slid down his nose, but his mind was still sharp as a tack. "Harold, I need you to pull the statements for Tommy's education fund. All of them, going back 2 years. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for my heart to sink completely. "Dorothy," Harold said finally, and I could hear him shuffling papers. "I was wondering when you'd call about this. I've been watching the account activity with concern. The account, it's been nearly depleted. Those words echoed in my head as Harold explained how Michael, as trustee, had systematically withdrawn money over 18 months. Small amounts at first, $500 here, $1,000 there. Testing the waters, seeing if anyone was paying attention. Then larger chunks, as his confidence grew. By Harold's count, he'd stolen over $60,000 of his own son's future. "Harold," I whispered, "tell me there's some mistake. Tell me there's an explanation." "I wish I could, Dorothy. The withdrawals are all properly documented. Michael had the legal authority as trustee, but the pattern..." Harold paused. "This isn't financial management. This is systematic liquidation." I spent the next 3 days gathering evidence. Bank statements, purchase records, anything that would show where Tommy's college money had gone. The picture that emerged made me physically sick. The Florida vacation they'd taken last summer, funded by Tommy's education. The above-ground pool that now dominated their small backyard, paid for with money meant for textbooks and dormitory fees. The newer car in their driveway, the one Michael had been so proud of, down payment courtesy of his son's stolen future. The confrontation was worse than I'd imagined. When I showed up at Michael's house with a manila folder full of bank statements, he knew immediately why I was there. I could see it in his face, the way his shoulders sagged, the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Mom, you don't understand," he said, running his hand through his hair the way he'd done as a child when caught in a lie. We were drowning. The car broke down right after Christmas. Lisa's hours got cut at the Hendersons, and Tommy needed so many things for school. We were going to pay it back. "With what money, Michael? And when?" I spread the statements across their coffee table, the same table where Tommy did his homework every night. "Tommy starts high school in 5 years, and college in 9. You've stolen his dreams and spent them on luxuries." "Luxuries?" Lisa's voice cracked. A reliable car so I can get to work. A vacation, our first in 6 years, so our family could have one good memory. This isn't luxury, Dorothy. This is survival. Survival? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. You survived just fine before you started stealing from your own child. Plenty of families get by without pools and Florida trips. We're his parents, Sarah chimed in. She'd arrived during our argument, clearly having been briefed by her brother. My daughter stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking exactly like she had at 16 when she was caught sneaking out. We know what's best for him. College isn't everything. Maybe he'll learn a trade like Dad did. Earl didn't need a college degree to build a good life. The casual way they dismissed Tommy's potential, the way they rewrote Earl's values to justify their theft, it broke something in me that I didn't know could break. Earl had spent his whole life emphasizing education, pushing both kids to graduate high school when he hadn't been able to. He'd been proud of his work, yes, but he'd always wanted more opportunities for his children and grandchildren. Don't you dare use your father's memory to justify this, I said, my voice shaking. Earl valued education more than anyone. Sure, you both graduated. He saved every penny so Tommy could have choices he never had. Michael's face flushed red. And where did all that education get us, huh? Sarah's got her associate's degree and she's still waiting tables. I went to community college and I'm still working retail. Maybe Dad's way wasn't as great as everyone pretended. So you decided to make that choice for Tommy? To limit his options before he's even old enough to understand what you took from him? We're giving him a childhood, Lisa shouted. A home with a pool, vacations, a car that doesn't break down every month. That's worth more than some abstract college fund. You will return every penny, I told them both, my voice deadly calm. Every single penny. Michael laughed. Actually laughed, throwing his head back like I'd told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. Or what, Mom? You'll cut us out of the will? We're your only children. Where else is your money going to go? Tommy will inherit everything anyway when he's older. Sarah nodded, emboldened by her brother's defiance. Besides, legally, Michael had every right to manage that money. You made him trustee. If you didn't want him making decisions about Tommy's future, you shouldn't have given him the authority. The arrogance in their voices, the assumption that my love was unconditional even in the face of theft, the way they threw legal technicalities in my face while dismissing moral obligations. That's when I knew I had to act. They saw me as a harmless old woman, too sentimental to ever truly punish them, too traditional to understand modern financial pressures. They thought they'd expertly maneuvered around an elderly mother who trusted too easily and loved too blindly. They were about to learn how catastrophically wrong they were. As I left their house that day, walking past the pool that had been purchased with Tommy's college fund, I heard Sarah call after me. Mom, you're being dramatic. This is what families do. They help each other. Tommy will be fine. We'll figure something out for college when the time comes. Figure something out. As if 13-year-old Tommy's future was just another problem to solve later. Another bill to worry about when it came due. That phrase echoed, in my mind all the way home, hardening my resolve with each repetition. Harold Peterson's office smelled like leather and old books, the kind of place where serious business gets done by serious people. The walls were lined with law volumes that probably cost more than Michael's car, and Harold's desk was a massive oak piece that had probably witnessed decades of family dramas and legal maneuverings. I'd called him the morning after that awful confrontation, and he'd cleared his entire afternoon for what I called an emergency revision. Harold had known our family since Michael and Sarah were in diapers. He'd handled Earl's business contracts, our home purchases. He even helped us navigate some tricky insurance claims over the years. If anyone could help me fix this mess, it was Harold. Dorothy, what you're proposing is, Creative, Harold said, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed my notes. And perfectly legal. But are you certain about this? Once these documents are signed and witnessed, there's no going back. This isn't just changing your will. This is fundamentally altering the financial future of your entire family. I thought about Tommy, probably at home right now working on his homework at the same kitchen table where I'd discovered his parents' betrayal. I thought about Earl, who'd worked 16-hour days to build something meaningful, something that would last beyond his own life. Most of all, I thought about my children's faces when they laughed off the idea of consequences, when they treated their son's future like pocket change. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Harold. They think love means never having to face consequences. They're wrong. The revision took 3 weeks to perfect. Harold brought in a colleague who specialized in trust law, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen who spoke about legal precedents the way Earl used to talk about foundation work. Everything had to be solid. Everything had to be built to last. Mrs. Sullivan, Patricia said during our second meeting, what you're creating here is essentially a financial time bomb with a very specific trigger. It's elegant in its simplicity, but devastating in its application. Are you prepared for the emotional fallout? Together they crafted what Harold called the most airtight recovery clause he'd ever written. The beauty of it lay not just in its legal soundness, but in its psychological impact. Here's how it would work. If any funds designated for Tommy's education were misappropriated before his 18th birthday, my will would automatically trigger a full restitution mechanism. Michael and Sarah would inherit exactly what they'd stolen from Tommy. Not a penny more. The rest of my estate, including the house Earl and I had spent 30 years paying off, the remaining savings accounts, Earl's life insurance payout, and even my mother's antique jewelry would go directly to Tommy in a trust managed by Harold's firm. The stolen money would be recovered through the reduction of their inheritance, dollar for dollar, with compound interest calculated from the date of each fraudulent withdrawal. But the real masterstroke was the documentation requirement. The clause specified that any trustee who had mismanaged funds would be required to provide detailed accounting of how the money was spent, not just to the court, but as public record, available to any family member who requested it. Michael and Sarah wouldn't just lose their inheritance. Their theft would be legally documented for everyone to see. Every purchase itemized. Every lie exposed. The psychological impact alone, Harold mused as we finalized the paperwork, will be considerable. They'll have to sit in that room and listen to every dollar of their son's money being accounted for, knowing that everyone present understands exactly what they did. But we didn't stop there. Patricia suggested adding what she called a rehabilitation clause. If Michael and Sarah could somehow repay the full amount to Tommy's education fund before my death, plus penalties and interest, their inheritance would be restored. It was a test, really. A final chance to do the right thing, to choose their son's future over their own comfort. It's more than they deserve, I told Harold as we worked through the details. But it's what Earl would have wanted. He always believed people could change if the consequences were clear enough. The paperwork was mind-numbing. Pages and pages of legal language designed to close every possible loophole. Patricia walked me through scenarios I'd never imagined. What if Michael tried to transfer his trustee responsibilities to someone else? What if they attempted to dispute the will? What if they tried to claim the money had been used for Tommy's benefit? Every contingency was covered. Every escape route was blocked. I signed the revised will on a Tuesday afternoon in October, with Harold's secretary and paralegal as witnesses. As I lifted the pen from the final page, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge, despite what my children might think. This was about justice, about teaching my children that actions have consequences, even when those actions are committed against the people who love you most. Dorothy, Harold said as he carefully placed the documents in his safe. "I have to ask, are you prepared for the possibility that they might never forgive you for this?" I looked out his office window at the oak tree in the courthouse square. The one Earl and I used to sit under when we were courting. Harold, they stole from their own child and showed no remorse. If they can't forgive me for protecting Tommy, then forgiveness isn't what this family needs right now. Accountability is. For the next 2 years, I watched Michael and Sarah continue their charade. They bought a newer car, a shiny Honda with all the modern features. They took another vacation, this time to Disney World, posting pictures on social media of Tommy grinning beside Mickey Mouse. They installed central air conditioning in their little house, replaced their old furniture, even talked about maybe buying instead of renting, all funded by their son's stolen future. Meanwhile, I became the grandmother who took Tommy school shopping, who slipped him $20 for movies with friends, who made sure he never felt the absence of what had been taken from him. I watched him grow taller, watched his voice start to crack, watched him develop the quiet confidence that comes from knowing someone believes in your potential. He started talking about college more often, maybe engineering like his friend's dad, or possibly teaching because he loved helping classmates with math. Each conversation was a knife to my heart, because I knew his parents heard these dreams, and felt nothing but relief that someone else was worried about paying for them. They thought they'd gotten away with it completely. They had no idea that every purchase, every improvement to their lifestyle, was being documented and cataloged for the reckoning that was coming. Sometimes I wondered if I should warn them, give them one last chance to make things right. But every time I considered it, I remembered Michael's laughter, Sarah's casual dismissal of Tommy's potential, their absolute certainty that love meant never having to say you're sorry. They'd made their choice. Soon, they'd live with the consequences. I passed peacefully in my sleep on a cold February morning, 3 weeks after Tommy's 13th birthday. The funeral was well attended. Earl and I had lived in the same community for 40 years. And we'd made our share of friends. Michael and Sarah played their parts perfectly, the grieving children comforting each other through their loss. The will reading was scheduled for the following week. Harold had suggested meeting at his office, but I'd left specific instructions. It had to be at the house, in the living room where Earl and I had made our plans for our family's future. I wanted my children to hear the truth in the place where they'd grown up, surrounded by the memories of better times. Tommy was there, of course, sitting between his parents on the couch where I'd read him countless bedtime stories. Harold sat across from them in Earl's old recliner, the will and supporting documents arranged neatly on the coffee table I'd inherited from my own mother. The reading of Dorothy Elizabeth Sullivan's last will and testament. Harold began formally, and I could almost see my children mentally calculating their windfalls. Michael had already mentioned wanting to pay off the house. Sarah had talked about finally taking that European trip she'd always dreamed of. Harold read through the standard legal language, the small bequest to charities and longtime friends. Then he reached the heart of the matter. To my beloved grandchild, Thomas Michael Sullivan, I leave the sum of, let me make sure I have this correct. Harold paused, making a show of consulting his notes. The sum of $437,000, to be held in trust for his education, and managed by Peterson and Associates until his 25th birthday. The silence in the room was absolute. I could imagine Tommy's eyes going wide, his young mind struggling to comprehend such a number. I could picture Michael and Sarah exchanging glances, trying to do the math in their heads. "I'm sorry," Michael said finally. "Did you say 437,000? That can't be right. Mom's entire estate was maybe 300,000. Oh, but it is right," Harold replied, his voice taking on an edge that would have made Earl proud. "You see, your mother included a very specific clause regarding misappropriated funds. It seems that over the past several years, approximately $62,000 was withdrawn from Thomas's education account by unauthorized parties. Sarah leaned forward. What does that mean exactly? Harold smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. It means, Miss Sullivan, that your mother's will includes a restitution clause. Any funds stolen from Thomas's account are to be recovered through the reduction of the thief's inheritance. Since you and Michael are the only other beneficiaries, and since the account was under Michael's trusteeship, the recovery is quite straightforward. He pulled out another document. This is the accounting your mother requested. Every withdrawal, every deposit, cross-referenced with your bank statements and major purchases. The Florida vacation in 2023. $8,000 of Tommy's college. Fund. The above-ground pool. $12,000. The car down payment. $15,000. Shall I continue? Michael's face had gone gray. You can't. This isn't legal. We're his parents. We were providing for him. Actually, Harold continued, clearly enjoying himself now. Providing for Tommy was exactly what his grandmother was, doing when she established his education fund. What you did was steal from your own child to fund your lifestyle. The legal term is conversion of trust assets, and it's both a civil and potentially criminal matter. So what does this mean for us? Sarah whispered. Harold consulted the will one final time. It means, Miss Sullivan, that after the $62,000 recovery, plus accrued interest and legal fees, your combined inheritance amounts to approximately, carry the one, $1,200 each, to be split equally between you. The explosion of anger, denial, and desperate bargaining that followed was exactly what I'd expected. But through it all, Tommy sat quietly, his young face cycling through confusion, hurt, and finally, a dawning understanding of what his parents had done. Finally, he spoke up, his voice small but steady. You took my college money? And that's when Michael and Sarah truly understood what they'd lost. Not just the money. That was just paper and numbers. They'd lost their son's trust, their mother's respect, and their own integrity. The look of disappointment in Tommy's eyes was worth more than any inheritance, and they'd thrown it away for a pool and a vacation. 6 months later, Tommy sent me a letter. Well, he sent it to Harold's office, asking him to read it at my grave. But Harold read it to me here, wherever here is. Tommy was thriving in his advanced placement classes, already, talking to guidance counselors about college preparatory programs. The trust fund was growing under Harold's careful management, and Tommy understood now that his education was not just secure, it was prioritized. More importantly, he was learning about integrity, about the difference between want and need, about the responsibility that comes with being trusted with someone else's future. He'd started volunteering at the community center, tutoring younger kids in math, and I could see Earl's values taking root in him in ways they never had with our own children. Mrs. Sullivan, he wrote in his careful 13-year-old handwriting, I understand now why you did what you did. At first I was angry at everyone, at Mom and Dad for stealing, at you for not just fixing it quietly, at the whole situation for being so complicated. But my counselor helped me understand that sometimes, people who love you have to make hard choices to protect your future, even when it hurts in the moment. He went on to describe how his parents were slowly rebuilding their relationship with him. They'd moved to an even smaller apartment, sold the pool house they'd been renting, and both taken second jobs. But more importantly, they'd started family therapy, and for the first time in years, they were having honest conversations about money, about priorities, about what it really meant to put their child's needs first. Michael had started making monthly payments into a new education account. Not because he had to legally, but because he finally understood that being a parent means sacrifice, not theft. It would take him 15 years to replace what he'd stolen, but he was committed to the process. Sarah had gotten serious about her own education, enrolling in night classes to finish her bachelor's degree, determined to model the value of learning for her nephew. "They're different now," Tommy wrote. "Sadder maybe, but more honest. Dad actually talks to me about money stuff now, explains why we can't afford certain things instead of just saying no. And Mom looks at me like she's really seeing me. For the first time. Like she understands that I'm a real person with my own dreams, not just an extension of her and Dad." The rebuilding wasn't easy or quick. There were setbacks. Arguments, resentments, moments when the weight of what had been lost threatened to crush their attempts at reconciliation. But they kept working at it, one conversation at a time, one honest moment at a time. A year after my death, Tommy made honor roll again. This time, instead of celebrating with an expensive dinner they couldn't afford, Michael and Sarah took him to the library. The same library where I'd volunteered for 20 years. They spent the afternoon there together, Tommy researching colleges, while his parents read books about financial literacy and rebuilding trust. It was a small moment, but it represented everything I'd hoped for when I signed those papers in Harold's office. Not punishment for its own sake, but consequences that led to growth, to better choices, to the restoration of values that had been lost somewhere along the way. 2 years later, Harold told me Michael had saved enough to make a substantial payment toward Tommy's account. Not the full amount. That would take many more years. But enough to show Tommy that his father's commitment was real, that the change in him was genuine. "I can't undo what I did," Michael told Tommy on the day he made that payment. "I can't give you back those 2 years when you thought your college fund was safe, when you didn't have to worry about your future. But I can spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to doubt my priorities again." Sarah had her own moment of reckoning when Tommy graduated 8th grade with highest honors. Standing in that gymnasium, watching her brilliant nephew accept awards for mathematics and science, she finally understood what Earl and I had seen in him from the beginning. Not just intelligence, but potential. Not just a child to be provided for, but a future leader to be invested in. The beautiful thing about justice isn't just the punishment, it's the possibility of redemption that comes after. My children made terrible choices, but they're still my children. Tommy deserved to have parents he could trust, and they deserved the chance to earn that trust back, even if it took years of hard work and sacrifice. As for me, I learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enablement. Real love sometimes means allowing the people you care about to face the consequences of their actions, even when it breaks your heart, especially when it breaks your heart. Earl was right about trust being the foundation of family, but he never mentioned that sometimes you have to tear down the old foundation and build a new one from scratch, stone by stone, truth by truth, until it's strong enough to support the weight of genuine love again. The money was never really the point. The point was teaching my family that some things, integrity, trust, the dreams of children, are too valuable to be spent on temporary pleasures. The point was showing Tommy that someone believed in his future enough to fight for it, even when the people who should have protected it had given up. In the end, I didn't just leave Tommy a college fund. I left him a family that finally understood what he was worth. And that inheritance will last far longer than any amount of money ever could. If you faced betrayal within your own family, or if you've had to make hard choices about love and accountability, share your story below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these struggles is the first step toward healing. And if you're a grandparent watching your grandchildren's futures being compromised by short-sighted decisions, remember, it's never too late to take a stand. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be an enabler. Your family's future is worth fighting for, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts.